Hannah, welcome to the podcast. I'm so pumped to have a conversation with you today. What's up?
Thanks for having me. Just grinding in the season and loving life and doing all things mental performance, but excited to riff with you today.
Heck yeah. I love our conversations, and I know we had a chance to chat a little bit before I hit record, but for the Fearless fam listening, who are you? What do you do? Where are you at right now? And give us the down low.
Yeah, so I'm Hannah Huesman. I am from Nashville, Tennessee, but currently live in Richmond, Virginia. My husband is a football coach, so he coaches the quarterbacks at the University of Richmond, and I am a mental performance coordinator for the Texas Rangers Major League Baseball organization. This is my 7th season in professional baseball, doing all things mental performance. So I get to travel up and down throughout our entire organization and support players and staff on the mental side of the game. So we're constantly talking about confidence and motivation and focus and all that good stuff to help train their mind, and not just, they're not just killing it from a physical standpoint, but they're killing it from a mental standpoint too. So we get to talk about all things mental all the time, and it's my absolute favorite thing to talk about.
So awesome. And for those of you guys that are not following Hannah yet, she posts some awesome content called Mental Sweat Monday. Tell us more about that. What, when you think about that, your message to the world and the impact, talk a little bit about the mission behind Mental Sweat Monday.
Yeah, so it's my heart and soul is what it is. Mental Sweat Monday kind of came out of the blue about 3 years ago, which is kind of crazy to think about. But one day I just came to this realization that, even my close friends and family were all like, what do you do? What's a mental performance coach? What is sports psychology? And, anytime you're in an elevator, someone's like, what do you do? Sports psychology. What is that? It's like, what is that pitch? What do you actually do? And so I was like, not enough people know about what we do. And the first part came out of, I want people to understand what mental performance actually is. And the only way to help people understand that is by putting content out. And so I was like, how do we get content out? And this was, again, 3 years ago, so pre-COVID and all that good stuff. So then it was like, okay, what do consumers want to see and hear? And I personally love short snippets of just kind of punch you in the face, wake you up, take it and run with it. And so I think when people are sharing content, you have to do what you're passionate about, because that's when your true colors will shine. And that's what I was passionate about, was short snippets. Let's do it on video. I know short podcasts are a thing too. And I was like, let's do it on video and see what happens. So it's a 1-minute video. Try to do it every Monday. Sometimes baseball season gets the best of me. But of just different strategies. And obviously it's only a minute, so it's not super in depth, but the idea is to start turning the wheels, start thinking about how this can apply to you, and then take it and run with it and make it your own. So really it's to spread awareness around what is mental performance, and then to help you kind of have different tips and strategies, not tricks, to help your mind work for you instead of against you.
Yeah, I love that line. Not tricks. I think if somebody has never experienced mental performance before, they assume, this is just fluff, or it's feel good, or it's motivational quotes, or, I've had coaches reach out to me and say, hey, Coach AB, I need a pep talk for my team. It's like, that stuff doesn't stick. Talk about, what are some of those obstacles that you've had to overcome to educate people on what, just what mental sweat does is what is this, and what's the science behind it, and how does this kind of mesh with the physical side of the game?
Yeah. Great question. I feel like I talk about this all the time, whether you're talking to somebody about a speaking event or even just a presentation you're going to give, the difference between mental performance and motivational conversations or a motivational presentation. What I don't want is for you to be really psyched out of your mind and pumped up and excited for 3 minutes, and then it dissipates. And then it didn't have lasting impact on you or your performance. And so to me, that's my sell on mental performance is it's so much more than just what we want you to do, right? We want you to be confident. We want you to be motivated. We want you to enjoy the ride. But we don't just want to talk about the what. We want to talk about the bottom of the iceberg. And that's what I call it. How do we achieve confidence? How do we achieve the motivation we want? How do you lock it in when you need to lock it in? And why are those things important? Like, one of my favorite things to talk about is like, is confidence always important? Like, do we want to be confident? For sure. But sometimes do we have to perform without it? 100%. So to me, it's not just talking about the what, which sometimes that's motivation, right? It's like, go do it. You can do it, which there's definitely a time and a place for that. Like, if you want to listen to a little pump up thing 2 minutes before you run out onto the field or the court, awesome. But like, if you want lasting impact, you have to understand the depth that comes with whatever you're trying to learn. And that's the how and the why. And so that's what I think mental performance comes into place is, this isn't just a quick fix. This is something that is going to become hopefully becomes part of who you are, your identity, and how you approach not only your sport, but life, right? And coping mechanisms and emotional control and energy control and all of that. It just makes you in more control of who you are and what you do. And to me, that's an elite level skill, because we lose control really quickly, especially in this world. Think about when you're in traffic, you might lose control really fast. And so it's like, how do we gain it back? So to me, that's what mental performance is. You're impacting long-term versus short-term, and you're impacting the human, not just the performer.
Mic drop. It's so much more than a sport, but also it's a grind. Talk a little bit. That was a great segue. Talk a little bit about, in the MLB, it's a grind. You're in the middle of the grind. We're a long ways out from October, and you guys have a game tonight. In the day in the life, like, talk about the day in the life as a mental performance coordinator in the MLB.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a grind. Like, and I saw something the other day that was like, everybody wants your job until they realize what it takes to have it. And I was like, that's how I feel.
Yeah,
because it is cool. And you know what? It is arguably glamorous because you are working with an MLB team, but it is a grind. So I am in a different city on a weekly basis, maybe even a daily basis. And from a coordinator standpoint, you go from the big leagues, but also we have a bunch of minor league teams too, all the way to the Dominican Republic. So you're traveling to support these guys, and the staff, no matter where they are. So every day it's really cool. And people ask me this question, like, what's the day in the life? It all looks really different every single day. So, but usually it entails some sort of, being around all day from the time the clubhouse opens to the time an hour after game. And you're having conversations throughout the day. You're watching, you're observing, you're being around. One of the best pieces of advice I got in grad school about being a mental performance coach was like, be around, but you don't have to be in the middle of everything. But like, if anybody ever needs you, they can look to their right and know you're right there. But it's never like, where are you? You're never there. So it's a really unique way of being there, being in the mix of things, but not in the middle of things, right? I'm never leading a huddle or anything in the middle of a game or during practice, unless it's a specific strategy or something that we're implementing where we're pairing a mental and a physical skill together. But it's usually consists of a lot of observation, a lot of conversations, a ton of listening, and then just like riffing with them, honestly, and like getting their brains to think outside of the perspective that they have, the lens that they have, and helping be a non-judgmental second, third party that's helping to let them see themselves from a different viewpoint. And like, is this helping you? Is this hurting you? What adjustments do we need to make? What are you doing well? What aren't you doing well? And keep going from there, and just checking in on how they are as a human too. Sometimes we get so locked up in just the grind that it's like, wait, how are we really doing? Like, have you taken a step back and processed any of this? So it looks different day to day, but that's pretty much the sum of it. And we'll have presentations too. We'll have like big group, small group presentations, depending on what's going on and what's needed. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, and just as much as you're in the grind, the players are also traveling and they're the ones performing on the field. And so that actually brought up a good topic that we have some parents that will be listening to this as well. How do you take what you just vocalized and apply it to a parent? Like, if you could reach through the microphone and shake a parent in the shoulders and say, dude, it's a grind at 12, at 14, at 16.
Gosh, no doubt. So whenever I think about parents, obviously I'm not a parent, so that's disclaimer number one. But I have seen a lot of players impacted by their parents. How about that? So it's a really interesting thought, especially the younger they are. And I feel like the cliche answer here is like, just let them go have fun, all that, which is true. Like, let them have fun, no doubt. But I think the biggest thing you can do as a parent is be consistent. It's be consistent in like anything and everything you do, from a good game to a bad game, a bad day to a good day. Like if you're going to ask a question after a good performance, ask it after a bad performance. If you're going to ask them, hey, what happened after a bad performance? Ask them, hey, what happened after a good performance? Like make it consistent. And I think when you do that, what you're doing is you're messaging the kid, your child, or even like as a coach, a young player, regardless of the outcome, we're still going to debrief the same way. We're still going to talk about the same things. Like and maybe it's a 1 up, 1 down after a good game, which are really easy. Maybe it's a 1 up, 1 down after a bad game, which aren't so easy, but guess what? We still got to do it. It's part of our process. And you're helping them realize that the way you talk to them, the way you treat them, the way you connect with them doesn't change based off of a win or a loss or a bad performance or a good performance. And I think we all as humans love consistency. And so they know what they're going to get post game versus like you get in the car and you're like, oh God, what are they going to say today?
Dreading.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I had those moments, like, and some of it was good and some of it was bad, but I think that's the first one. And then the second one would be after you've been consistent, feel free to acknowledge or hype up or build them up on the things that are inside their control. To me, that's the easiest 2 things to do as a parent is be consistent and like, don't be like sick home run. Instead, be like, I really appreciated that you stayed locked in and didn't lose focus or hope or motivation on your home run after you struck out the time before. Like you could have given up because you struck out and tossed the towel in from the first AB of the game, but you didn't, and you stuck with it. And look what happened. So you're praising the process, which just happens to have a cherry on top outcome. Instead of sick home run, dude, where you're constantly just praising the outcome, or nice win, which you can say those things. I don't like, that's good. But like, if you're having a real depth conversation, make sure you are acknowledging and commending them on the things that they actually had control over.
So good. Yeah. And can you go back to the 1 up, 1 down in that's like a 1 positive, 1 negative, 1 good, 1 bad. Like, can you describe that?
Yeah. Choose whatever word works for you. Like, I think it's definitely per person, but I usually say 1 good, 1 bad, like, because I don't think there's a stigma in like, yeah, you're going to probably do something bad every performance, So it's like people kind of try to light foot around it. And it's like, okay, here's 1 thing you did well. And here's 1 thing we can improve on, which is fine. Like whatever works for you. But in my mind, like I'm pretty realistic and I'm like, hey, here's something I did really good. Here's something that wasn't very good,
And the athlete knows that.
And
like you played the game yourself. And so right?
Yeah. And it almost, and like in some situations, it's like, what did you do not so well? And they're like, just say, it's okay. And also this exercise is to teach you how to manage both good and bad. Like it's to help build your confidence on the good. And it's also to help you realize you're always going to be growing. And like humility is not a bad thing. And acknowledging where you need to get better is a very good thing. And that's a strength, because unless you're 12 years old and the best player and you're never going to grow at all, there's something bad, right? There's something to work on. Like even the big leaguers, the best of the best, like that's what I say separates the best of the best is they're constantly finding things to be better at. And if you think about the idea of needing to get better at something, that means you're not great at it, right? That means there is a gap. And so I think just having that awareness of, what's 1 thing you did really well today and 1 thing you need to work on, or 1 thing that was good and 1 thing that was bad. It's whatever you want, but keep it consistent no matter what. And if they give you 2 good, make them give you 2 bad. Or if they give you 7 bad, make them give them 7 good. I think that's important because you're just trying to balance out the good and the bad. And here's why, because sometimes in a bad performance, all they're going to talk about is all the things that they did really bad. And they're not going to talk about the things that they did really well. Or on a good performance, maybe they don't even talk about the performance at all. And they're just like, see ya, where's my snack? Like, I'm going to go play with my friends later. So therefore we have an uneven assessment and evaluation of what's going on. So anytime we evaluate our performance, we're only evaluating the bad. And then when we do, we're absolutely grilling ourselves on all the bad. So we're actually never noticing the good. And we're not creating a good habit of when we win or when we are successful or when we perform well, we're not dissecting that. And I think that's a major miss that a lot of people have is we can dissect the heck out of the bad, but then we have something really good happen and we just chalk it up as a win. And you're like, you have to dissect the good as much as you dissect the bad. Think about that. Like the thing we want to create, the thing we want to do the most, we're neglecting, no chance. So consistency, do it the same way, regardless of the performance, and see what happens.
Boom. So good.
Yeah.
And I love that you said the word win, which is so funny because that's what we call it in our warrior calls inside our program. Is every single call, every single coaching call, we are starting with a win, and they get to acknowledge that. And sometimes they give me blank looks, and it takes them a while, and I'm waiting in the Zoom chat, waiting for them to type a win. And it really starts to make them think.
I love that. I've had conversations with players and I'm like, okay, tell me something you can get better at. Boom. Okay, tell me something you did well today. Blank stare.
Crickets.
And it, like, to the point where I'm like, well, did you wake up on time? They're like, oh yeah. Okay, that's a small win. Like, it may not be a big win, but it's a small win. Did you get to the field early? Oh yeah. Did you do early work? Yeah. You know, it's like all these things that they almost don't even process as wins because it's just like part of what they have to do.
The expectation.
They're losing sight of that. That's actually a lot of wins. And it's just a great perspective reminder. And as you know, for sure, but hopefully most people know, we're naturally super negative. Like, humans are super, super negative. So you have to be very deliberate about finding the wins. And we call that hunt the good stuff. And there's a reason it's called hunt the good and not go look for the good. It's like, no, you got to hunt it down, because sometimes it can be really, really hard to find and to see, especially when you're like deep in the trenches, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's another thing I want to riff with you on is hunting, this idea of hunting. I'm very curious. I've never talked with you about this, but I would love your take. And I'm sure that you are going to drop some gold nuggets, but some of the things that I have discussed with other coaches and parents is the idea of a slump. And before I preface this with anything, what's your idea? What are your thoughts on a slump? And then let's just riff on it.
Okay, so I do think slumps exist. That's the first question. And I guess a slump is just when you're not performing to the ability that you can, or you're not performing as well as you know you can. And it's over a longer period of time. So it's not a day, it's not even a week. It's, if I had, I mean, I'd say two weeks of struggling would probably put us into a slump. So yeah, that's what I would say. You're not up to your fullest potential, or maybe you're pretty far away from your fullest potential, because every day you're not going to be the best version of you constantly, right? You're not going to have a Hall of Fame performance every single day.
Right.
So it's not an average performance. It's like a below average performance for an extended period of time.
Yeah, I love that perspective. So my thought process is talk about it. What I'm hearing you say is slumps exist. Let's talk about it, but let's challenge it. I think, we see the MLB, we see these long seasons. And I think now youth sports, we're playing 70, 80, 90. It's insane. And so these are going to start happening, and burnout is going to start happening. And I think one of the mistakes that I see parents and coaches make is that we beat around the bush around it. And like, I don't want to say the word slump. I don't want to talk about it because then it'll make it worse. And what I'm hearing you say loud and clear, which I was, pretty much guessing your response on that, is talk about this stuff and challenge it. Is it really a slump?
Yeah.
Or are we just calling it a slump because you had one bad Saturday?
Yeah. And like, what's worse, like sitting in a car when everybody knows you're kind of going through it and nobody's saying anything? Like, that's even worse in my book. It's like, hey dude, hey gal, like, just not going the way we want it to go right now. And you're not your best. And like, that happens. It happens with the best of the best, but you're also like, do you know yourself? Do you have something to fall back on? Do you know what you need, what adjustments you need to make without hitting the panic button? I think sometimes we hit the panic button so fast, but you made a good point too on like, one bad performance is not a slump. Two bad performances isn't a slump. I literally was even questioning like a week's worth of bad performance. It could just be a bad week, you could show up the next week, especially in the game of baseball and softball, like do the exact same thing. And this is something I've talked about in the past. You know what the Twitter definition of insanity is? Like doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Sometimes in baseball and softball, that's what we're doing.
Right.
Like, if you have a great approach and everyone's like, your mechanics are on point, your thoughts are on point, go up there and do it. And then you go up there and you strike out, or you line drive out. Are you going to come back in and change everything? No, you're actually, everything is where it needs to be. You are in a great headspace. You are locked and loaded. The hitting coach is telling you everything's great. The pitching coach is telling you your mechanics look great. You're going to go back out there and do it again. And you are going to hope for different results and expect different results because you know your process is exactly where it needs to be. And so it's a little backwards because baseball and softball, you're so prone to fail, which it's a cliche, but you literally are, you are prone to fail. So if every time we fail, we're making adjustments, like we're going to be constantly changing and like
have a different swing every night,
which like is unrealistic. Like you can't do that. And so it actually is like, take a step back. Think about it. If your process is freaking solid and you have an off night, you're not going to change. You shouldn't change it from the next night. Now, if we go again, 10, 14 games in, and now all of a sudden, okay, the approach isn't working. Maybe there is a small adjustment we need to make. Like, let's look into this, see, maybe we've gotten off of our plan. Maybe our swing looks a little different. Our approach looks a little different and we aren't even aware of it, but be careful, just like pulling the quick trigger on adjustments. Like that's the biggest thing, because then you get into it and you start adjusting everything. And then you put yourself into a slump when you weren't in a slump. And then next thing you know, it goes a month, 2 months. And then finally you're like, I'm done with this. Like, I'm just going to go out and play like the game how I know how to play. And then you're back to square one. And it's like, if only you could have realized that a little bit sooner. And I do think that's a lot of mental performance is how do we lessen the period of failure or the period of a slump by gaining control of who we are and what we do. But yeah, don't create a slump for yourself. Like they're going to happen. Like they happen to the best players in the world, like ask everybody. But don't create it if you don't have to create it. That's what I would say about a slump.
I love it. I love this. I love these conversations. I'm enjoying this so much. So tell me a little bit about, we're kind of shifting and jumping around, but you know, you're working with arguably some of the best athletes, you know, they've made it to the bigs, they're at the top and they're getting paid buku bucks, a lot of money to swing a bat and throw a little white ball. And so what gives them the mental edge?
Some of them don't have the mental edge. Fun fact. Like some of them struggle really, really a lot more than what people would think. Like it's because even though you're making a lot of money at the biggest stage, there are still stressors. And, you know, people ask me a lot, like, what's the difference between like stressors and minor leaguers and big leaguers? The stressors just change. They don't go away. Like there's no stress. It's not just this like,
I made it. No stress.
We're good. Everything's fine. It's like arguably even more stress up there because now you have to stay. Like a lot of guys will tell you the hard part isn't making it. The hard part is staying, right? Because once you're there, now the target's on your back and you have one bad performance and you might get sent down. Like that's just how it works. You have to produce now. You have to help us win now. And so I just don't, I think that was the reason I said that is because I don't want it to seem like everybody up there has it figured out and it's perfect up there. Like that's why there's mental performance coaches in MLB, like because they don't have it all figured out. So there's still stressors. But I do think they have an elite level for the most part of like a very, very short-term memory. Like it's like, I can't even afford to think about past failures or successes in this moment because the only thing I can think about is this moment. So I think they're really, really good at compartmentalizing, if you will, or even like seeing the bigger picture. And it's kind of cool. The older the guys get, and then you see guys have families and get married and like gain that different perspective and like, wait, the most important thing, like, yes, I love baseball and this is a huge piece of who I am, but there's also these other big pieces of who I am. And it's kind of cool. Like there's a massive mentality shift when somebody experiences like a big life change or gets married or has a kid or whatever it is, like those perspectives of those versus like maybe a rookie coming up when this is all eat, breathe, live baseball.
Right.
And sometimes that is the biggest blessing and the biggest curse is like, all I want to do is be successful. But then it's like, when I'm not successful, they tend to get in their own way. And I say this all the time. This is one of my favorite one-liners, I guess, is baseball is hard enough. Softball is hard enough. And you're going to fail plenty of times on your own. Don't be one of the reasons you do fail, right? Like don't get in your own way. Like how do you get out of your own way? The baseball or the game's going to have you fail plenty. Make sure you're not the one creating the failure or at least attempting not to create the failure. And so I just think a big piece is that perspective shift of knowing who you are what you're doing and that baseball is just a part of it. Instead of it's like every pitch is like live or die, and I think you get into a really slippery slope when it becomes that. And I'm sure that's kind of trickling down, getting into the younger ages too, which is kind of crazy to me, but we have to help them realize that there's more than just baseball. And like, yes, it's a huge part of who we are, and more than just softball. It's a huge part of who we are. It was and still is. Obviously, we're super passionate about it, but the sooner you can realize that it's a piece of what you do. And just because you have a bad game, it doesn't mean you have to have a bad day, or just because you have a good game doesn't mean you have to have a good day. Like those two don't have to be intercorrelated, but sometimes as parents or coaches, or even as the player, you create that. And if you can learn, like, that's what I would try to work on from a young age, is maybe if they don't know who they are from an identity perspective, because they're 12 years old, and that's okay. Can you separate, like, if they have a really bad game, could they still have a good day? And like, how do we still make this a good day? And not just let good days come after good games. Yeah. That's a lot, but yeah.
I think you're right. I think it is trickling down into younger and younger ages, which is why I love the space, that I get to work in. Is I want to make mental performance accessible to the youth. And some of the coaching calls that I'm on, it's like this is the same thing being echoed up and down, up and down. So
no doubt. And we don't have it figured out.
Yeah. I mean, so thinking about some of the guys that you're working with, some of those conversations, mental skills, mental performance, the conversations, shifting beliefs, like, can you talk about some of those skills that, maybe some of your players like more than others, and the difference between skills? I know we teach them inside of our program, but what are some of the skills that your guys are using?
Yeah. I think the most important skill is, and I guess it's not really a skill, but it would be just like filtering out all the negative information, and the bad, because like I said, there's different stressors, especially the higher you go, and like you're constantly analyzed and you're constantly being graded, and Twitter and social media and all that is out there and absolutely berating you. I had a player come up to me and say, guess what? And I was like, what? He's like, I deleted Twitter yesterday. I was like, let's go, like it's happening pretty frequently, because they're realizing by searching, like, once you get to this platform, like, everybody's tweeting about you and everybody has an opinion of you. I think the U.S. women's national team, somebody was saying that, like, it's the public's job to have an opinion about you. Like, there are beat writers who are like paid to write about you and give their opinion about you. And so it's just a really slippery slope, getting caught up in the negativity. And like, when guys find ways to get through that and process that and not really care about what other people are thinking and only worried about what they're doing and how they're doing it, that's when you see this like huge burden come off their back. And they sometimes have to figure that out on their own. But I think it takes people helping them create that awareness, like, hey, there's a lot of pressure being put on you, or like, seems like you're wearing a lot of weight right now. Where is that coming from? Is it coming from you? Is it coming from what you're feeding yourself? Is it coming from your inner circle? Like, let's try to pinpoint where that's coming from and then do something about it. So filtering out the negative is a really big one up there. And then I would say the second one is just like, how do you show up every day, like motivated, 162 games, plus a month of spring training, plus a month of playoffs, if you're lucky, so it's a really long season. And it's like, how do you show up every single day, knowing every single day isn't going to be perfect, isn't going to be the highlight reel day? How are you showing up every day and giving everything you got and taking care of yourself? Like, from a holistic standpoint, they're really good about that, because they know there's no way they're going to make it travel this much if they're not taking care of themselves, from nutrition to hydrating to stretching to meditation to getting good sleep to then performing and all that good stuff. It's like the holistic viewpoint of making sure they're doing everything they can to be who they want to be on a daily basis. I think that's a important piece of just taking care of all the pieces, not just showing up and playing baseball. It's actually taking care of all the bigger things too, off the field.
Yeah, that checklist of your day of am I trusting the process? But I hate that term of trusting the process, but like, what is that process? What are the check boxes?
Yeah. And there's a lot. There's a lot of them. And your professional job is to be a professional baseball player. And so it's really like, kind of balancing it between it being a game and a job, because it is a job, it is their job, and they do have a responsibility to take care of the things that they can take care of. And so making sure they're doing that and not getting just caught up in the grind, as you will, and spending 3 hours in the cage. It's like, maybe actually the best thing you could do is not go to the cage today, or go take a nap, or sleep a little bit longer, or eat a healthy meal, or spend time with family, or FaceTime a family member, or talk to the mental performance coach, whatever it is. It's like, what's going to be best for me that day. And it might not just be the physical reps, because you can't like crush yourself physically for that long. You're literally not going to make it, So it's finding what works for you, and everybody's different. That's the hard part, right? Like, there's not one way to make it to the big leagues. There's not like, if you do this exact plan, you're going to make it to the big leagues. That's different for everybody. And so again, it kind of comes back to knowing who you are and knowing what you need, and then making sure you're giving yourself that every single day, and like not letting that veer off the tracks very often.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah.
So talk about a little bit. I know you mentioned this. I think it was in a speaking event, which I didn't get a chance to ask you about how Australia was. You're speaking, you're traveling. One of the topics that you had talked about was it would be crazy if we waited until game day to implement a physical skill versus we treat the mental game that way. So can you riff on that?
Yes. I love this idea. Think about it, right? Like, if the coach is like, hey, I want to change your swing, or I want to change your pitching mechanics, or I want to adjust your defense, whatever it is. And you're like, okay, let me try it in a game first. Like, don't even tell me what I need. Just like, tell me what I need to do. And then I'm going to run out to the field and I'm going to do it. You would literally never do that, right? You would want to like, let's get 100 reps, 1,000 reps, 1,000,000 reps in. And then once I even feel comfortable with it, then I'm going to implement it in a game, right? It's like, even when you don't feel super comfortable with it, you're probably not going to implement it in a game. But sometimes we have this idea where, so I call it like, you can think about it as like a practice mentality and a game mentality, right? Usually those are very different. When we're learning skills and techniques and adjusting and mechanics and all that, it's a very internal focus, right? We're thinking about our body, we're thinking about how we're moving, we're slowing it down, which is really good. And we need that. That's how we learn new skills. But when we're in a game, the mentality is more like external. So it's compete. Where's the ball? Me versus you. Dog eat dog. Here we go. I'm going to grind it out. The problem is, if you've only practiced thinking about technique and mechanics during practice, and then you go into a game and you're like, I'm thinking about competing, but you've never practiced really thinking about competing, it's going to be really hard to produce that mentality. And you might be able to do it once here and there, but to be able to do it consistently, you're not going to be able to do it because you don't practice it. And so to me, this comes down to, where are moments in the practice day, the practice schedule, where you can take some of these game-like mentalities, whatever game mentality you want to have, like whether it's a bulldog mentality on the mound, an aggressive approach in the box, whatever it is, you're taking that and you're actually practicing that in certain moments during practice. So you're getting reps on your game mentality in practice. You're not just thinking internal thoughts in practice and trying to go external in a game. You're mixing internal and external during practice. So the first time you use that mentality isn't in the game, if that makes sense. So it's just knowing what you need, knowing what mentality you want to achieve, and making sure you're practicing that before you actually get thrown into a game and try to do it. So something small, but this pops up a lot when you see somebody who's killing it in the bullpen and then goes into the game and struggles, or crushes balls in BP and then goes in the game and can't hit a fastball down the middle. Why? Like, your swing didn't change drastically, right? Your mechanics didn't change overnight, or even within 3 hours of BP in the game, or 1 hour, whatever it is, So the only thing that could really be shifting drastically is your mentality and your focus. And so it's start to create awareness around, what are you thinking about in practice? What are you thinking about during a game? And do those things align? And if they don't, where's the disconnect? And how do you start to connect those thoughts and those mentalities?
I love that. And by mentalities, are you referencing, are we practicing mental skills like mental imagery, before you get into the game? Are we practicing our self-talk? If it's knowing your why, or any of these mentalities of integrating the mental skills with the physical skills at practice. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah. I mean, and like, here, listen, like, imagery, self-talk, like all of those things are really, really good. you don't do all of them in a day. You know what I mean? Like you figure out what you need, just like you don't do every single drill you've ever learned from a physical standpoint in a day, right? It's what do you need? Like start practicing. Like self-talk kind of is always kind of churning and going. So maybe it's visualizing before a game and that's your thing. That's what you do. Maybe it's even just getting quiet before a game and winding down, and or maybe it's getting hyped and getting pumped up. It's whatever you need, but you implement that and you be as consistent with it as you possibly can. So it's whatever you need, whatever mental skill you need. But I like just caution to the wind of like, it's not all of them. You don't have to do all of these. And like, you don't have to read every mental performance book on the shelf to like be really mentally tough, right? It's like, find what you're good at, use it, find what your weakness is, work on it, and do that consistently. But yeah, I mean, I think your mental preparation should be just as consistent as your physical preparation. You know, if you go stretch and warm up, how are you warming up your brain? Whether it's listening to a favorite song, playing ping pong with your friends, laughing, hacky sack, whatever it is, like, what's your warm up for your brain? Like telling your brain, hey, we're locking it in, game time's coming, let's do this. Think of your brain just as your body, right? You got to warm it up, you got to get it ready. And then you have to perform in a game when you're not really thinking about much, but you have one main focus, right? You want your body to do one thing, you want your brain to do one thing. And then post game, how are you cooling down? How are you recovering? How are you recapping the game? I've never really thought about it like that, but I think there's a lot of similarities from, like physically taking care of yourself and mentally taking care of yourself from pre-game, during game, and post-game.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. So everyone talks about their successes. And I know we've had some really cool conversations today about mental performance. And I think confidence from a standpoint of you're not always going to be confident, but can you give us a behind the scenes? Some of these conversations on the podcast is, you know, you've kind of alluded to it, that we're not always going to be confident. We're not always going to be successful. Can you talk about a time where you, as a mental performance coach, were, you know, maybe not successful, or some of the struggles that you faced?
Which one? I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I think it's to get to where you want to go. Like, I'll put it this way. One of my greatest mentors was Ken Ravizza, who was like the OG, mental performance coach in baseball. Like he kind of really got the ball rolling and has a couple books, and he was pretty amazing. I remember sitting in one of his lectures at a conference 7-8 years ago, and he's like sitting in front of everybody and he's like yelling, like really passionate, like he does. He's like, you want to be like me? And I'm like, yeah, you know, everyone's like, of course we do. Like, you're Ken Ravizza. And he's like, you can't be like me. You haven't failed enough. And I was in grad school. And so I had just a little bit of applied hands-on work. Like I hadn't done a ton. And I was like, whoa, like probably hadn't failed a lot. Hadn't done enough work to have even failed yet. You know what I mean? And I was like, whoa. And it was a whole new perspective on me, because it was like, you have to get out there, you have to fail, you have to figure this out before you can be really good. And I didn't really like that at first, because I was like, no, I don't have to fail. Like, I got this. I'm going to be good. I'm going to find a way. And
we're not conditioned that way. You know, we come from sports, we're athletes, we're conditioned to be competitive.
Yeah. And kind of like not to fail. But the reality of it is, like, when you're constantly pushing yourself and trying to get better and better and better, you're going to fail. It's the inevitable. So I think one of the biggest times that I failed, and this may or may not make sense. Hopefully it does. But as a mental performance coach, something that's really important is the relationship you're constantly building with the players and the relationship you're constantly building with the coaches. And like working in baseball, if you kind of go one-sided, you will lose the other side, if that makes sense. So like if you fully invest in the players, the coaches will be like, well, what are you sharing with us because of confidentiality, right? How do we know you? How do we know that you're bringing all this good stuff? How are you helping us? What are you actually even doing? We don't even really know what you're doing. Or the opposite, right? If you get only invest in the coaches, then the players are like, well, you're not here for us. You're one of them. You know, it's like you're creating this divide in between the two of us. And when I first started with the Phillies, I just was like there for the players. And I like thought that's what you do. You go serve the players. And I did. I jumped right into it. And I had all the players like locked and loaded, and they all loved it. And I remember like asking a coach for something like that I thought was like a no-brainer. And he was like, no, we're not doing that. And I was like, wait, hold on. Why? You know, I couldn't figure out why. And it was because I had like completely neglected my relationship with the coaches. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even think about it. Right. I hit the ground running with the players. Like, it was like, you don't know what you don't know kind of thing. And it took me about a year to work and mend, because I didn't know these people. So it almost like was year 2 before I even like got to know these people and really invest in them. And then for them to trust me. So I kind of had to dig out of the hole and then build the hill up, you know? So it was a really good learning moment, and something cool to like start with the Rangers, of like starting from ground zero, of learning like, okay, come in even keeled, like support both at the same time. And it worked really well. But that was a big one for me with the Phillies. That set me back about a year of like, shoot, I can't just be one-sided. I have to find a way in this unique position for everybody to trust me and be able to support everybody and have the most impact. And so I came in a little too gung-ho with the players and neglected the coaches at first, and luckily ended up being great. But it took me about a year to fix that one. That was a big one. And when I realized it, I was like, what have I done? You know, like, and I thought maybe there is no coming back from it, because trust is really hard and really finicky. And it wasn't that I had broken their trust. It was that I just didn't build it. And so it was a little mending, and it took me a solid year to get back to a good spot. And then we hit the ground running, and then the coach was like, yeah, whatever you want, you know. It was awesome. But it took about a year to mend that. So that was a big one for me in my professional career.
But a huge lesson that you will never forget,
Yeah.
that will impact you in all areas.
And if anybody's like, I want to be a mental performance coach in baseball, that's one of the first things I tell them. Like, I'm like, make sure you're filling both relations, which is really, really hard. Like, and it's not impossible, but it's a really hard task to like be everything for everyone in that moment. But you have to find a way to not get too one-sided in the baseball world.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of leads into our final question. I ask this of all of my guests, and I love what this brings up, but your answer is yours alone. You are a time traveler, and you can go back in time and give your past self one message. What would you tell yourself?
Ooh. Wow. I would tell myself it's going to be really, really hard. I would tell myself there's going to be doors that close that you wanted to stay open. But when the doors close, the window opens somewhere else, and go bust through that window. That's what I would say to myself, because I think I think a lot of things happen for a reason. And in the moment, you have no clue why those happen, and you hear it all the time, and you think this is going to be an easy ride. And like, I think from the outsider's perspective, it's been an easy ride for me and like my career, but it has been really, really hard. And some of the things that I wanted didn't happen, and it led to other really good things that I didn't even know could happen. So it would just be, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it. But like, it's not going to be this easy, smooth ride that I think some people think it is, but it's going to be really hard. But you're going to enjoy the hard, is what I would say too. Like, it's going to be really hard, but you're going to be strong enough to get through it. And you're actually going to end up looking back and loving that it was hard. How about that?
That's great.
Yeah.
I will heed that advice for past Hannah and future Hannah. Yeah. So following your journey, this has been an amazing conversation. Where can we follow along your journey? I know you've got just your wheels are spinning on all different avenues, and you're traveling the country. Where is the best place to follow you?
Yeah, pretty LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram are kind of my main channels. And they're all just Hannah Huesman. And then if you have an email is kind of a tough one for me, but if you want to email, feel free to. It's just hannahhuesman@gmail.com. So I love riffing about this stuff. I love questions. And so feel free to ask questions when you hear this, and tell me you were listening to this podcast, and we'll go from there. But yeah, I love all things mental performance, and I love spreading the word about it. So at the very least, follow along, keep spreading the word about mental performance, and helping people realize that it is in your control, and you can do something about it, and you're not just born with it. You can absolutely do something about it.
Awesome. Hannah, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It was great talking with you.